I think perhaps the worst four-letter word imaginable politics is compromise. Our team has to succeed and their team must fail.
I'm Shane Cory, and this is episode 7 of Independent Citizen. Today we have Russ Verney as a special guest. He's our first guest of the show. I'm excited to have him on. I've known Russ for a number of years and know his unique perspective going back to his history with Ross Perot. Back in 1992, Russ was a senior advisor to Ross Perot's campaign, which was the most successful third-party campaign in modern history, and then ran the campaign in 1996. A year before that, he started the Reform Party with Ross Perot, so that in 96, he actually ran on a party ballot. So Russ, thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Shane, it's a pleasure to join you and an honor to visit with all of your audience. And I like to tout that I'm a raging moderate. I'm not a Republican, not a Democrat, and I just simply believe that we don't have enough opportunities to express our individual viewpoints. We aren't either right-wing or left-wing. We aren't either liberal or conservative. We aren't either right of center or left of center. We're all of those things in the audience, but we don't ever get a chance to express those viewpoints in our elections today. We get to choose one or the other.
Well, absolutely. And, you know, the overarching theme of the show is going back to George Washington's farewell address. And he spoke of the baneful effects of the spirit of the party. Everything he spoke of has come true. He talked about occasional riot and insurrection. Well, that kind of happened, right? In just, you know, foreign influence, you name it, factionism has created these polar opposites. And you would know better than I do, but I have not seen a more divided country in my lifetime. And I don't think it's getting any better anytime soon.
I think perhaps the worst four-letter word imaginable politics is compromise. It just simply cannot occur in today's political environment. Our team has to succeed and their team must fail, no matter what the issue is, no matter what the question is. We must succeed, they must fail in order for us to achieve success. And that's just plain wrong. I mean, Shane, I think back a few years to when Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House from Massachusetts, an avowed liberal, used to go have drinks with Ronald Reagan, an avowed conservative, in the afternoon after they fought all day in public over policy, but they were friends. You know, you can get along in life. You don't have to be my way or the highway. You have to be looking out for the benefit of the country. And I think that, again, goes back to so few options for expressing our viewpoints. Like this last election, 74 million for Trump, 81 million for Biden. What does that tell us about the progressive movement? What does that tell us about the far right? Nothing. What does it tell us about the right of center and the left of center? Nothing. So we're left after an election with a confused outcome because we're only given those two choices. Nobody knows how much of the public is interested in a right of center or left of center. Let me give an example of why that's so important. In 92, when Ross Perot ran, he talked about deficit spending and accumulated debt in this country and how it was crippling the future of the country. And people voted. That was the first they ever heard of that. And he did 30-minute infomercials, educated them, and they voted based on issues like that. Well, in 1998, Bill Clinton, for the first time since Eisenhower, balanced the federal budget. And he only did that because of the size of the Perot vote, and he wanted to incorporate those voters back into the Democratic Party. And in 1994, we saw Newt Gingrich campaign for the House of Representatives on a national platform of Contract with America. I happened to help negotiate part of that. Half of that was the platform of Perot's 92 campaign. The other half was the platform of Ralph Reed's Christian Coalition, which were two groups the Republicans wanted to bring back into their voting fold so they could win elections. So you may not win an election, you may not win a new issue, but if you're strong enough, they will go and incorporate it. But you have to have the ability to express that viewpoint in order for them to want to compromise your vote and bring you back into the fold. So, I think one of the great things we're seeing in American politics today is the start of ranked choice voting. where you take the race up in Maine for the United States Senate. Some people were upset with Susan Collins. She had a Democratic opponent, and there was a third party, an independent running in there. So if people liked that independent, they could vote for him. And if they didn't believe he had a chance of winning, it didn't matter because they got to vote their second choice. So when the votes are counted, that independent comes in third. His first place votes are thrown out, and everybody who voted for him first place, they counted the second place votes, and then Susan Collins wins big. So it's a way of avoiding the wasted vote syndrome. Now, here's where that's important, Shane. In 1992, the media paid for and organized and conducted exit polling under Voter Research Services was the name of their organization. And they asked multiple questions of people coming out of the polls. And all those who voted for Ross Perot, they asked, if Ross wasn't in the race, who would you have voted for? And the analysis of the answers to that question was the outcome would be the same. Bill Clinton would have won, but because there were only two candidates now, he'd have been a majority candidate. He'd have been 50% plus one instead of being a minority president with the three people in there. So they also asked the people who said they voted for Clinton or Bush, if you thought Perot could win, would you have voted for him? Now, the news media asked that question, collected the data, and never once reported it. But Dr. Gordon Black and his son did publish the results of that. And the results of that was that if people thought Ross Perot could win, even after he got out and got back in, if people thought he could win, they would have voted for him and he would have won. So there's where something like ranked choice voting comes in. If people could have selected him as their first choice and Bush or Clinton as their second, Perot could have won. So there are reforms that can come along that make it more palatable to have additional parties where people can express their viewpoint, but it's very difficult to do. In 1992 and 96, Perot petitioned the country to get on the ballot in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. That's not a small task. It's very seldom ever accomplished by anybody because it's so difficult and so expensive. And every time there's a successful independent candidate that comes along, whether it's Wallace or McGovern or Perot, the Republicans and Democrats in the state legislatures who don't like competition increase the bar in their state for you to create an independent party or a third party.
There's a few things I want to specifically ask you about, but let's step back to the second Congress. So just taking a look at the House and the Senate. And the Senate, ever since that first Congress, so the first Congress, we didn't have parties yet. Second Congress changed. Since that time, we've had 6 senators elected as independents. 2 of them serve today, Bernie Sanders and Angus King. In the House, we've had 9 members of the House of Representatives elected to office as independent. I mean, those numbers are astounding to me and should be to everyone, and highlights that if you don't fall in line with a political party, your chances of being elected are pretty much nil. So, you know, hearing those numbers, I have my views as far as why it's so difficult for an independent to become elected, and also the benefit of being an independent. Bernie Sanders does not have to kowtow to the Democrat Party. Love him or hate him, he doesn't have to fall in line. He doesn't need them to get elected. Same with Angus King, who is known as the kind of conscious middle of the Senate. He could vote any way he wants. And he voted nearly a majority of the time with the Trump administration in this last session, and with Democrats on the other side. So he addresses each issue on its own merit, which I think is a better service to his constituents than serving the interests of the party. Now, as far as the challenges of becoming elected as an independent, when you started this with Perot in 92, media is a huge thing. Inclusion in the debates, which at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, but that first debate, while that was the first debate of the Commission on Presidential Debates, it was still at least paid for by the League of Women Voters. Is that correct?
No, the the Commission on Presidential Debates had squarely taken hold of it by then. It was the previous election where they forced League of Women Voters out of actually hosting it. But now that's a private corporation that's owned by the Republican and Democratic parties. That's not, you say Commission on Presidential Debates, you think some government entity. It's not. It's not even a nonprofit. It's a for-profit corporation that's set up by the Republicans and Democrats and makes a ton of money off those debates. But yeah, Ross was included in the '92 debates, but only because George Bush said to the debate commission and Clinton, there will be no debate without the front runner, that's me, and I will not participate unless Perot is included in all three debates. The commission came back, said, well, we'll let him in one. Bush said, no, he's in three or I'm not participating. And he forced them to include him under the thought that Perot would split the anti-Bush vote and keep Clinton from winning. That was the mistaken thought that they had. Unfortunately for them, Perot won all three debates.
Now, with and people looking back that may not remember the time or may not know the details of it. So compare Perot's run to Bloomberg's run in this last season, or even Trump to a degree, although they're still running under the banner of a major party. You think, oh, well, Ross Perot was a billionaire. He put in a ton of money to his campaign to get all the media attention, and that's how he started polling so high off the bat. Is that fair or is that false?
Well, there's a lot of truth to it, but comparing Perot and Trump is a valuable exercise, I think, because both were independent businessmen, both were not party loyalists, not activists in a party, but clearly had a partisan viewpoint of some sort. When Perot was thinking about running in '96, we did a big exercise of should he run as a Democrat, run as a Republican, or run as an independent? What are the pros and cons? And we finally concluded that since these two parties are essentially private clubs, they have their own process, leave them alone, don't go in there where they've got their favorite sons to be the class president this year. Let's go do our own thing and not be beholden to them. Trump says, well, here's a party that's already established, it's weak, doesn't have a clear front runner. I can step in and maybe I could win it, maybe not. But if I do win it, I get automatic ballot status all across the country, and all I had to do was some interviews. I didn't have to spend millions of dollars. I get all this television coverage to promote my brand. So if I lose, I win. So he decided to do the sort of hostile takeover of the Republican Party because he wasn't a Republican. And you can verify that because in the 2020 election, the Republicans did not have a platform. The platform was whatever Trump wants to do. So it wasn't him joining the Republican Party. It was the Republican Party taking advantage of his celebrity status and ability to attract media attention to obtain the presidency. So there are two different avenues you could follow. The benefit of going through a party is that you get the ballot status. They can put your name on the ballot for election. For an independent candidate, it's a monstrous project to get your name on the ballot. In 2008, there was a group called Unity 08, and then in 2016, I think there was another group, something that went out and did ballot status. And they were essentially a campaign and waiting for Bloomberg, and he left them standing at the altar twice, never actually ran. When he did run, he ran as a Democrat, and it was too late and too unorganized, never really made a commitment to running and winning. So Bloomberg's not a good example, but Trump is a good one of running in a party, taking control of the party apparatus to your benefit, but not being an advocate of the party, where Perot went independent, created his own avenue to get on the ballot in all 50 states, provided his own funding, and didn't have to do the fundraising. But when you're running for Congress, I don't know what the tab is this year, but it's probably about $2 million for a congressional run. And if you've got 100 weeks, 2 years in order to raise that kind of money, the only thing you're doing while in office is raising money. And what you need is the benefit of the party's fundraising, the party's mailing list, the party's database. As an independent, you have to create all that from scratch. A state like Vermont for Bernie Sanders doesn't need much.
Well, but once you go down that path, you will basically be owned by that party. because they're the ones that are going to put you in again and again and again unless you rock the boat and they want to get rid of you.
In 1994, the Republican Revolution, the Contract for America, it was called the Republican Revolution. But in fact, 92% of all incumbents won re-election. That's not much of a revolution. The change occurred where people didn't run for re-election and they were able to co-opt some of those seats. But the party raises money and the party gets you the ballot access. But take Lisa Murkowski up in Alaska. The Republicans were dissatisfied with her, ran a primary candidate against us. She ran as a write-in candidate and won. So there are unique states that are more libertarian than the rest of the country, like Maine, like Vermont, like Alaska, that those things can work. It's not the norm for other states where you may be able to run as a Republican or Democrat and then switch to independent afterwards after you're elected and maintain your office. But running as an independent is very difficult, and that's why so few have ever been in the House or the Senate.
Well, let's go back to Perot's campaign, because it's my belief Perot suspended his campaign in July of '92, correct? And then jumped back in October?
Yeah, the last week of September, yeah.
Yeah. So, it's my, at least, hope that had that not occurred, he had a good chance of winning. Would you agree with that?
Well, yes, I most certainly agree with that. Plus, to reinforce that, even after dropping out and getting back in again, the exit polling is saying that if people thought he could win, he would have won. So, yeah, I think had he stayed in all along, because again, when he dropped out in July, he was leading in the polling. So, he wasn't an unknown at that time because he'd had a lot of public exposure through his philanthropy and business successes over the years. But he was in great standing when he stepped out. And just wasn't able to recover when he got back in, but people were still inclined to vote for him.
So had that not occurred, he had a good chance of winning. I don't know how the Electoral College works in a three-way race, but let me ask you this. So with Trump, and I think that, especially for a national election, a candidate has to have some type of spark. If they're not backed by especially if they're not backed by the party and just, a ton of money, there has to be some type of spark to boost an outsider. With Trump, it was his fiery performance in the debates. Did Perot have that spark? And if so, what was that spark?
Well, I think that in '92, the public had a great desire for a change from business as usual. The establishment just wasn't performing to the progressive viewpoint. And I don't mean politically progressive, I mean socially progressive viewpoint of the public. It was stagnant. It was business as usual every day in Washington. So whether you went from Reagan to George H.W. Bush to Bill Clinton, there wasn't really any change to public policy. Even when George W. Bush came in, not. And even Obama, he didn't do anything creative until he did Cash for Clunkets. So, none of doing the same thing over and over again, as Einstein said, expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. So the public was ready for somebody who thought different, acted different, and had common sense and some stature. I think Perot fit that. I think the public wanted that from Trump. I don't think he delivered on that as well as he could, maybe because he was still struck within a party. But today, I believe that viewpoint is still out there. There's a hunger out there for somebody that will be a disruptor. And Trump was the ultimate disruptor when he came in. If he did anything great, it was to disrupt the status quo. So as they want to snap back to where they used to be in all these agencies, they're still going to have corrections. They're never going to get back to as bad as it was for a decade or more. So we've got chances to re-engineer a lot of our social policies to update them instead of just carrying on failed bureaucratic policies from the past. I think that attitude in the public is still there. They're just waiting for somebody to come along that can attract their attention and excite their energies again and their interest in politics.
I go back to in '92, I turned 18. I was excited to cast my first vote in my first election. And I was just a kid that knew nothing about politics, working at Discount Tire in Texas. And but what stood out for me and why Ross Perot got my first vote was because I didn't see a difference between George Bush and Bill Clinton. I looked at, the Republican candidate and the Democrat candidate, and I didn't see any differentiation. I didn't see anything that would change the nation for the better in I wouldn't say a radical way, but just getting away from the status quo. So me being a non-political kid, what you just said fits the bill. That's why I voted for Ross Perot enthusiastically.
And I think a lot of that attitude still exists. And if anything, from what we saw in '92, that same attitude exists today, but on steroids. It's waiting for waiting for somebody to come along and just light that spark to get them back engaged again, and doing something that will truly change the course of the country and leave a better country for our children and grandchildren than what we inherited.
Is there, and there's no comparison to Ross Perot. I was talking to Wes behind the camera this morning, and I was going back and reading about Ross Perot's history. He was an amazing man. So there's no comparison when I ask you this next question. Who's the next Ross Perot? Do you see one out there that could gain the trust of the American people, ignite their passion, and possibly win a presidential election?
It's really hard to say that person is out there. They haven't stepped forward in the political arena. We've seen some people like Howard Schultz from Starbucks, I think it is, step out there. Wasn't going to be the person to do it. Bloomberg, he's come to the church several times, but never gone to the altar. He's not going to do it. He's not. Is somebody like Bezos or Zuckerberg going to do it? I doubt it. They got too many, too much baggage. Somebody like a Mark Cuban, a real maverick. I don't know. He might not. There could be people out there, but they have to actually dedicate themselves to wanting to do it and wanting to win and making the personal investment. Perot was a little different. He felt that if people wanted him to run, he would. And that's what he said on Larry King in February of 1992.
Is there any scenario in which you would run for president? Can you give me a scenario in which you'd say, okay, I'm in?
Well, number one, I don't want to.
I know, but is there a scenario?
Number two, if you're that serious, you, the people, are that serious, you register me in 50 states. And if you're not willing to organize and do that, then this is all just talk. Stay with me, Larry.
Are you
saying to the ordinary folks, if you're dead serious,
start
then
committees in
I want to
Florida,
see
Georgia.
some sweat. I want to see some sweat.
Like all of the country just went out and started petitioning. They figured out how to get them on the ballot in their states and went and did it. It was a marvelous groundswell of support. Is there somebody out there that could do that today? I don't see them right now, but as we get closer to the 2024 election, entirely possible because the attitude of the public is still ready for it.
So this is, we got to keep in mind, 92 was really pre-internet. You couldn't go to Wikipedia and learn more about Ross Perot. You couldn't, I was reading his story again this morning. He started off as a top salesman for IBM. He, one year he met his annual sales quota in 2 weeks and went to, which, him, you are probably not surprised by that. But he went to IBM and his supervisor said, I have some good ideas. They didn't go for it. So he started EDS. Flipped that for $3 billion, something like that. But one thing that stood out, and I'm not sure if the American public was aware of it because it really is before my time, 2 EDS employees were held captive and imprisoned in Iran. And he sent in a private team and freed them, right?
Yeah, he hired a former Green Beret colonel to lead a team, and he asked for volunteers from his employees at EDS. Ross had always done a lot of recruiting through military former military people. And he got a team of former special forces from his own company. They all volunteered to go in to Iran, to free the two company hostages. But before they went in, Ross himself went in. Now, Ross's mother's in the hospital dying of cancer at the time, and his mother said, "You need to go get your employees. Don't stand here with me." So he went into the country in disguise, visited his two employees in jail, and got out without it. Now imagine Iran getting to hold him hostage. Sent in his team. He recruited somebody local there to create a little protest outside the jail so that his team could do the jailbreak, and they bust themselves all the way up to Turkey to get out of the country. It's a novel on Wings of Eagles by Ken Follett, and it's a miniseries that was on television. Very compelling story about somebody just dedicated to his employees. He always felt that if you take care of your employees, everything else will fall in place. You don't worry about the stockholders, you don't worry about the customers, worry about your employees, and you'll deliver a quality project to people that want it at a price that'll get your investors happy.
And I assume he had thousands of employees, right? It's not like he knew these two guys. And
EDS had over 200,000 employees by the end. Then in 96, 97, I'm sorry, 91, 92, he started Perot Systems, which had another 60 or 70,000 international employees. It was a similar company providing computer services. But in addition to that, he did so many philanthropic things that it's just impossible to go through all of them. But he was one of the very first to raise funds for HIV, for AIDS research. Nobody nationally would want to touch that subject. He felt he needed to. He started an experimental school in Dallas. Stop taking kids in underprivileged neighborhoods out of their neighborhood, do the quality schooling right there in the neighborhood. It was a model school, the East Dallas School, I think is the name of it, a model for all of education. Terrific. He did it over and over, all of medical. Everybody that was in Iraq for the chemical leaks that had all the symptoms coming back that nobody believed in him. He funded many research studies to get that proven that they had been exposed to chemical. He just was an amazing philanthropist. So he had a lot of media exposure, as well as an enormous fight with General Motors when he was put on their board of directors. He didn't think they were running a very credible company.
So in 92, was most of the public aware of that, story of how he saved his employees in Iran? Were they aware of really what a great American he is? My memory is this crazy Texan with his charts on TV that made sense. But I wasn't aware of these stories as a kid as I went to vote for him. So was the public tuned into that or not?
In 92, the adult population was probably familiar with, but not in the tip of their tongue about the Iran situation and the hostages. But the whole country was mesmerized by his attempts to free the POWs. I mean, he flew an airplane Christmas of 67, 68, somewhere back there. He flew airplanes all around the world trying to deliver packages to them, and going to France where the negotiators were meeting for the peace talks, trying to force them into. He did everything for the Vietnam POWs. When they were coming home, the San Francisco was, I think, having a celebration, but they couldn't get it off the ground. Perot went out and took care of it. He paid for their kids' college educations. He just did everything to support the POWs and their families back here, and especially the wives forming the POW organization and representing them and forcing Reagan and many others to, not Reagan, Nixon and many others to address the POW issue during the peace talks. So we all knew. Our generation got our first exposure to Perot with the Vietnam War and what he was doing on behalf of the POWs. Then there was a big dust up with General Motors. They bought half of, he took over their computing business for the company, and they got half of his board of directors, half his company. They took ownership of half his company, and they gave him a seat on General Motors board of directors, and he didn't like the way they were running their retirement plan, funding it for the executives, but not for the hourly workers. He didn't like the way they were treating their dealers around the country. So there was a big dust up, and they finally bought him out, took over all of EDS and bought him out entirely and took him off the board. So that made a lot of public noise, as well as he had sent a team into Cambodia looking for POWs that were supposedly held there. And they arrived at the POW camp probably weeks, maybe a month after they had been moved out of there, and weren't able to rescue anybody. So there were lots, as well as the Iran story, there were lots of things that the public probably had heard of, weren't necessarily in the tip of their tongue, but when they get mentioned, it was refreshing to, oh yeah, that's who that guy is.
Yeah. So Russ, you were running your state Democrat Party in the early 90s. And then, how did you get together with Ross Perot? And it seemed like you heard he was running and you're like, I'm all in, forget the Democrat Party. I mean, how did that happen?
Well, it's a little more complicated than that. I was the executive director of the Democratic Party in New Hampshire in 1992. That's the year Bill Clinton eventually won the nomination. I think in New Hampshire, Paul Tsongas won the primary in New Hampshire, but primaries are just collecting delegates, and Clinton eventually won. Our primary is first in the nation in New Hampshire, so New Hampshire exports political consultants, and I happen to be one of them, I guess. So during the primary election, I became familiar with all of the national vendors and media for presidential politics, and after the primary was in February, I believe. And during the summer, I got a call from one of the companies in Washington that provided software to presidential campaigns and said they were doing work for Perot. He just got out of the race in Texas. They needed somebody to come down and help oversee recreating all the financial activity that took place all across the country without the campaign knowing it, and putting it into compliance with the Federal Election Commission. Would I be willing to do it? So I went there for an 8-week job, and like that sign says in the highway, slow man working ahead. I spent 9 years there, so I had a great time. And let me just tell your audience the difference between, I've been involved in Republican Party politics, Democratic Party politics, and independent. And whenever I go to a Republican or Democratic event, everybody's there for a reason. They want something. They want a network. They want a donation. They want a job. They want a contract. Everybody's there for something, to get something. When you go to a group like those supporting Perot, everybody was there to give something. What can I do to help? Because Perot had nothing to give them. He didn't have jobs. He didn't have ambassadorships. He didn't have ability to get them elected. So it was about service as opposed to self in independent politics. And I think that's one of the unique differences that you find with independents like a Bernie Sanders, like a Angus King, Lisa Murkowski now, is that it's not about what you can do for me personally, it's what can you do for us as our state or our country.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Russ, thank you so much for your insight and for the stories. When it comes to Ross Perot, I don't think we could learn enough about the man. And so, love to have you back on sometime and talk about that or whatever issues are out there. But thank you so much for your time today.
It's been a real pleasure to be on with you. And again, thank you for letting me speak with your audience.
All right. Thank you, Russ. So thank you so much for joining today. Again, that was Russell Verney. And Russ and I go back many years. He's done so much. He's kind of like the Ross Perot of politics, in that he's just such a rock. The most reliable, steady-handed. The entire room could be on fire. People running around, screaming and yelling. And Russ is there like a rock with his cup of coffee, just trying to get his work done. And I'm honored to know him and have him as a friend. And I hope you enjoyed his discussion, and we'll have him on again soon. So thank you again. Like, subscribe, share this, and we'll be back next week. Thank you.